It is my pleasure to introduce my co-speakers and the panel for today. We're going to be joined today by Liam Rogers, who's a research analyst from 451 Research, Philippe Vincent, a senior advisor at OpsRamp, and Ciaran Byrne, vice president of product management for OpsRamp. Liam is a research analyst in both cloud native and applied infrastructure and DevOps channels at 451 Research, where he covers observability and monitoring, including topics such as APM, AIOps, infrastructure monitoring, log analytics, distributed tracing, and event analytics. Philippe Vincent is a senior advisor at OpsRamp, where he has, in IT operations, where he's worked in various roles, including most recently CEO of an AIOps and hybrid monitoring solution, as well as a consultant to CIOs and many software companies, as well as heads of product and engineering for over 20 years. Ciaran Byrne is OpsRamp's vice president of product. As an AI expert with over 20 years of experience in site reliability, engineering, and service assurance, Ciaran has led the product management function in multiple startups. At OpsRamp, he is currently leading a transformation journey to modernize the user experience, reduce time to value, and enable a frictionless customer path to automation and service reliability. On the agenda today, we'll be talking about getting to full automation for IT operations, and we're going to be doing that by reviewing the state of IT operations as it is today, using some trend analysis and research from 451 Research. Then we'll be reviewing the future state of AI in IT operations and what it looks like when we get to finally full automation. Are there some guideposts and some benchmarks that we can look to guide us on that path from adjacent industries? And then finally, we'll be talking about how to get to full automation in IT operations from a product-centric view, including some insights from the OpsRamp team. This webinar is, of course, brought to you by OpsRamp. We are the digital IT operations management platform for digital business. We currently serve over 1,800 customers in mid-size and large enterprises worldwide across the globe, including companies such as Mizuho, Fujitsu, and Inspire Brands, serving companies who are looking to modernize their IT operations across a hybrid landscape using hybrid monitoring, multi-cloud monitoring, event and incident management, AIOps, and of course, process automation to drive efficient workflows. You can learn more about us on opsramp.com. So what I'd like to do first is kick it off to Liam, who is going to take us through a little bit of the research that he has found in the current state of IT operations. So Liam, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. Great to be here. As Jordan said, I'm Liam Rogers. I'm an analyst here at 451 Research, part of S&P Global. And what I'm going to be sharing is some of the data we have from our Voice of the Enterprise end user research, where we talk to various enterprises and large enterprises. And I'm going to be taking you through some of the data, kind of showing where we are with IT ops today and some of the complexities and dynamics that are occurring. And I want to start off with this chart here because we see the move of code to production just increasing to faster and faster cadences. You see more organizations releasing things into production at a weekly basis, at a daily basis. And I mention this because this, in many ways, is a very good thing. It can result in more value for end users. It can speed up the pace of innovation, but at the same time, it's not without its challenges, and this can complicate things from an operational perspective. So on the next slide here, we're looking at some of those challenges that organizations have to overcome when it comes to, operations, but just IT in general, which is there's emerging needs, and that results in skill shortages. There's not enough staff to support the needs of the organization. There's increasing organizational complexity, and it's just fewer and fewer people available to do the things that need to be done, and the things that need to be done are just growing in complexity and variety over time as we see more emerging technologies come into the picture. And so this really compounds the problems that operations has been experiencing for years already. Operations has never been a problem-free job. There's always been challenges, and so we just see a lot of those challenges heightening. And so on the next slide here, I call out some of the newer challenges, especially as we see more adoption of cloud native technologies, more mainstream adoption of containers, Kubernetes, serverless. And these are some of the technologies that help organizations, meet those fast release cadences, but they're also the ones that contribute to security concerns, complexity, and really highlight some of those skills gaps and personnel shortages where we have these large, complex, highly distributed microservices applications, and then you have the need to manage them. And then that's, going to be in relation to what you already have going on, legacy infrastructure, whatever you have on-prem, stuff going to the cloud, you have hybrid multi-cloud. It's just this complex web of things to both monitor, keep under visibility, but also manage on a day-to-day basis. So on the next slide, I highlight the number of vendors that an organization might engage with to try and meet those monitoring needs. And this has become a real pain point for a lot of organizations because they're engaging many vendors, potentially multiple tools from some of those vendors just to try and meet the variety of needs that they have from a monitoring perspective, from an APM perspective, as they try to maintain visibility over that sprawling IT real estate that they have. And this, again, compounds operational challenges because you need people to not just use these tools, but then manage the tools themselves. And the tool sprawl just becomes a pain point because it's cost. Maybe some tools go unused and then you have data silos. You may have different teams using different tools, et cetera. So moving on, IT ops really bears the brunt of a lot of this, and their list of responsibilities, it just goes on and on, right? IT ops has to respond to incidents and do resolution for on-premises infrastructure, for cloud resources. They have to choose tooling to monitor these resources. They have to manage that tooling. They have to just manage and monitor so many different things, and it becomes really challenging to respond to every incident because it's more time consuming potentially to respond to incidents because of the complexity, and increasingly they may not be the ones to do ultimate remediation. So it's really a complex relationship that IT ops now has within an organization, and I highlight that on the next slide because I look at how DevOps is sharing some of these responsibilities. They're helping IT ops ideally with their incident response. They are also picking and managing some of the monitoring tools used to maintain visibility. And so we have a lot of different teams when we talk about observability pulling in data, leveraging that data for their own use cases. It's IT ops, it's DevOps, it's security, it's developers. And so you have all these different data streams and they're all super useful in helping you do root cause analysis, incident response, getting mean time to resolution down. But you have to have some synergy between those teams, between that tooling in order to make that possible. And I want to move on to one of the key topics for today, which is how a lot of organizations are kind of hoping that AI will help alleviate some of these burdens. As we look to address these challenges where we don't have enough people, we have increasing complexity, we have tool sprawl. AI is one way that organizations are hoping they can bring more intelligence to what they're doing and hopefully simplify things so that they can get the most out of their people, make them the most effective they can be. At 451, we really see AI ops as any tool in monitoring incident response that uses AI ML. It's a broad definition. We see a lot of different tools falling under this category, but for the most part, it's all about getting the most out of your people, giving them better tools to do the work that they need to do. And so on the next slide, and you can hit twice to build this one out fully, but AI ops itself is a complex topic because there's AI and ML tend to get conflated a lot. I did it on the previous slide where I said AI/ML. And, as an organization looking to AI to enhance their operations and enhance their observability tooling, it can be challenging to understand what's going on, what's being done. Is it really boosting your productivity? And so I call this out just because, these technologies tend to get conflated, and it's not that any one is more valid than the other. It's different tools for different situations. But there are varying degrees of sophistication when we talk about AI in operations. And so I want to highlight that, not all implementations are necessarily on the same footing solely because they're using AI or ML. But moving on, we look at going to the next slide, we look at why organizations want to use AI in operations in the first place. And, I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of siloed data because you have different teams, different needs, all pulling in data, all pulling in telemetry, and you end up with a lot of siloed data that, when brought together, can be very valuable to help expedite things like RCA. But you'll see on this list here, a lot of organizations, they're looking to reduce manual tasks like setting thresholds for alert to bring that noise volume down. They want to speed up RCA. They want to relieve alert fatigue. But, a lot of these are interrelated. And by improving correlation, you might also be speeding up RCA and vice versa. And so there's a lot of these needs end up being very related to each other and just focused on making things more efficient. And so on the next slide, we see a lot of optimism for AI in IT operations. And a lot of organizations here have the hope that AI is going to help them find problems before they become problems, bring more of that predictive or proactive element to their operations. So you're not always reacting to things, but you're kind of taking action as needed. And it's also, like I said, boosting employee productivity so that people can do their jobs more effectively, spend less time doing manual tasks, less toil as they, go through their list of responsibilities. And the conversation wouldn't be complete going to the next slide if we didn't talk about automation, because the reality is, AI can help organizations act more intelligently with the data that they're already collecting. It can be bringing that data together, analyzing that data in a way that's impossible or just time consuming for people to do. But a lot of organizations are really looking at how that AI intelligence matches up with automation. Right now, there's a lot of recommendation engines happening where it's maybe serving up suggestions to operations on how they might improve things or optimize things. But a lot of organizations are hoping to get to that more automated state. And I'll call your attention to the bottom of this chart here, where we see 7% of organizations saying they're all automated in their processes and IT automation today, and 20% want to get there in 1 year. And it's very aspirational, but a lot of organizations are hoping that they can get to that stage where they're really reducing a lot of the manual labor involved in operations, bringing in more automation and bringing in AI with that automation to make it more intelligent, make it more human-like in its decision-making, so that IT can trust those recommendations, trust those actions. And so I think I'll leave it there and segue over to the next speaker.
Liam, so really interesting to me, one of the insights that I'm finding in this research is that there seems to be a broad expectation that AI can help you get to solutions quicker, but they're not supposed to solve anything more quickly, right? We are talking about insights and not actual actions. Is that true, first of all? And second of all, is that a change in the expectation of AI since its inception over the years?
Yeah, well, I think it can be true. And I think it potentially is a change in the expectations, because there's certainly were a lot of lofty expectations and continue to be a lot of lofty expectations for AI. Like AI in itself is, this intelligent force that's going to act on its own and, effectively be an artificial human. And we're certainly not there yet. Maybe we will be someday, but right now, a lot of AI in the context of operations is that intelligence. It is that recommendation engine, kind of giving you advice, saying, hey, things aren't performing as they should be, or not as well as they could be. Here's some recommendations on how to fix that. But again, it still falls on operations to make those actions and, capitalize on those recommendations. And I think that's where a lot of organizations are hoping automation really will complete the picture. And we can talk about the reasons why there's kind of a gap there, but definitely trust in the AI itself is one of those reasons.
Right, right. Well, I think that kind of sets the stage into this next conversation that we're going to have from Philippe, who sees a lot of the trends reflected in the adoption of AI in adjacent industries. And Philippe, if you're out there, we would love to open that discussion and talk a little bit more about some of the trends that you're finding.
Yes, thank you, Jordan, and thanks, Liam. For full disclosure, once upon a time, I was an automation research engineer, and so I have a passion for automation. I have spent the past 20 years in the world of IT ops, and I think it might be useful for us to look outside our industry a little bit to get some context on automation. And I think, as Liam stated, automation is a necessity. Our customers are dealing with just too much to do and not enough people to do it and not enough skills. And they're really hoping that AI can supplement the operators and give us the ability to do a lot more with sometimes fewer people. But I think one of the things I'd like to propose here is that we might need a little bit of a structure in thinking and describing the state of automation and our journey to automation. So I thought it'd be helpful to look at a driverless journey that pretty much everyone is familiar with. It's the journey towards driverless automobiles. Now, we can all readily imagine a future when we step into a vehicle, issue a voice command, and then we go on with our business while we sit down and we go on with our business while the AI takes over and takes us to our destination. But despite billions and billions of dollars of investments and despite incredible progress already, we're not there yet. And something that I found useful here is that the Society of Automotive Engineers has created a 6-point scale to describe this progression of automation towards driverless automobiles. And the first 3 levels of this scale that you see here in light blue represent essentially what you can buy in a dealership today. And the ones in dark blue represent where we're going in the next few years. So if you don't mind, Jordan, would you mind building the first 3 levels? Mm-hmm. Thank you. So the first level, level 0, is called no automation. Now, there is a little bit of automation there. There is something like ABS, which temporarily takes over your brakes and applies them during emergency situation. But this is really of very limited duration and very limited scope, so it doesn't really get any credit in the scale. The first time you get some level of credit is level 1 with driver level assistance. That applies to things that are applied over a sustained period of time, such as cruise control, for example. But in level 1 driver assistance, what's critical here is that the driver might be calling upon what I'm broadly calling AI here and delegate some responsibility, but it's in a narrow scope and it's in a very specific environment, such as highway driving with low density of cars. And more importantly, the driver monitors the environment, monitors the condition, and evaluates when to regain control. Now, we've had that for quite a while already. The more recent capabilities that we can buy at dealership are more of the level 2 partial automation type. Now, in level 2, the driver delegates full operation of the car. The brakes, the gas pedal, the steering, essentially everything you use to make decisions on the road. But it does so under still fairly some narrow conditions, still highway driving. And what remains very important here is that the driver is still watching the environment and is deciding when to regain control. And that largely describes the state of the art with a few modifications depending on which model of cars you might buy today. But a real change shows up when you get to level 3. And if you wouldn't mind building the last 3 bullets, Jordan, please. Yeah. So when you get to level 3, which they call conditional automation, the big change here is that while similarly, the driver delegates full operation to the AI, but the driver stops monitoring, stops paying attention to the road, might start reading a newsletter or speak with other passengers. And it still happens under select conditions, such as highway driving, for example. But in this case, the AI is monitoring the environment, the AI is monitoring the driver, and the AI is going to be pinging the driver when it's time to regain control. But it has marked a big change in the trust the driver has in the AI, that the driver can stop watching over the AI and say, you know what, you're good at doing this. I trust you. Wake me up when it's my time to get re-involved. Level 4 then applies the same model to a broad range of conditions. So no longer just highway driving, but now we're driving in cities, we're driving in rural areas. And level 5 is the point where there's no longer any driver in there. There's only human passengers. There's no steering wheel. And AI takes us there, and we're now at full automation. So the reason I'm sharing this is because I think it describes a progression that is also relevant to what's happening in IT ops today. And I really suggest that the industry, our industry, should have something like that to describe the growth of automation against a whole variety of use cases that exist in IT ops today. For example, we have various levels of maturity. I think use cases such as the ones Liam was mentioning a moment ago, like alert rationalization, is something that AI is pretty good at doing today. You know, many vendors vendors like OpsRamp, for example, can make claims that we can reduce that by 80 or 90%. And we're doing a rather good job at those use cases of AI. Other use cases of AI, such as the ability to determine the root cause of a problem, are still things that are in development that are not yet at the same level of maturity. So they might be maybe a level 1 when alert rationalization might already be a level 2, for example. So I think in general, this kind of idea might help us define the roadmap towards driverless IT ops. With that, Jordan, would you mind clicking to the next slide?
Yes, and I'd love to also get Ciaran's perspective really quickly on that roadmap. If you look at that roadmap in driverless automobiles and you think, some of that does track a little bit with how I think about a roadmap for AI ops. I mean, I know that we're going to get into this quickly here with observability and AI and the human operator, but just when you're thinking about the roadmap, Ciaran, are you thinking in kind of those terms and levels of automation?
Definitely. If I think it also goes back to some of the points that Liam made. I think that they basically, to me, what I think about it are things like trust. There's different levels of trust, and there's different levels of trust, I think, based on the thing that's being automated and the impact the thing that's being automated can have. In other words, if you're doing alert rationalization and you present a set of correlated alerts to somebody, then that's one action, and the consequences of that could be dire consequences to that if it led somebody to get incorrect or improper insights. There's other cases where somebody may be routing the ticket to a particular team based on machine learning and Liam's definition of it. Then there's other cases where you may actually want to apply a fix. And they're all different. The consequences of it being correct, of course, are that you're saving time and energy and fixing things faster. And the consequences of it not being correct also vary. So I think there's a combination of kind of trust and then the consequences of it being wrong that needs to be considered. And, people are more trustworthy of things that are not so consequential, I guess. So I think those are dimensions that I think about. And then I think trust and transparency are really, really important. Yeah. Showing value and quickly showing value, because there's lots of complexity, I think, in this space. And I think the sooner you can get people started on simpler use cases, is my experience.
Yeah.
In that journey that that Philippe has presented. Don't start them at that top level.
Yeah, I think obviously a lot of it has to do with the quality of the data, which I think brings us to the slide, Philippe. If you want to pitch back to you and talk about the value of the data, and in particular where observability plays a role.
Yeah, I wanted to turn to, well, who's involved in this journey to automate? And Ciaran just talked about the human being. In IT ops, it's the operators, sysadmins, the DevOps teams, whoever is acting upon this information. With driverless automobile, it's the driver and it's the AI. And we just talked about this dance between AI and the human, where one is watching the other, one is delegating to the other, and eventually building trust that the AI is going to do the job right. That is clearly a key dynamic of that automation path. But in addition to that, and in IT ops, we focus a lot on AI, but what I'm really getting encouraged on the IT ops side is something that we can already see on the driver on the automobile side is huge investments in observability. What's enabling the driverless automobile is a huge investment in arrays of sensors all around automobiles, whether they are cameras, radars, or LiDARs, all around. Their job is to provide the sufficient visibility of the environment so that the environment can be controlled. And I think these three characters, observability being a foundation, and then AI and human having their interaction on the path to automation, are the cast of characters that are on that journey to automation. So what I'd like to do now is to bring it back to the context of IT ops, perhaps more explicitly. If you could get us to the next slide for a second. Thank you. So just for context, in our world of IT ops, what we're trying to automate here is the process of resolving issues, the process of detecting, anticipating, and resolving issues. Traditionally, it's done through the monitoring and event and incident management technologies. And so what we're asking here is, with AI, how much and how far are we going to be automating this process? Would you mind getting to the next slide, please, Jordan? Thank you. So the first thing to realize here is that we find the exact same cast of characters that we find with driverless automobiles. You've got the human, you've got the AI, and then you have observability. Observability is the first requirement and perhaps the foundational requirement. It's interesting that AI ops preceded the trend from observability in our industry. But if you really thought about it from an engineering discipline standpoint, if you want to automate, as a former automation engineer myself, you want to automate something, the very first job is you need to be able to describe what you're trying to automate. And I'm very encouraged with the fact that our entire industry, the whole monitoring industry, is adopting this goal of observability because it is a key requirement to automation. But observability in the control engineering sense simply means having all the information necessary to describe the system we want to control. Now, in IT ops, it does mean that we're finally unifying a lot of the old monitoring silos and domains. It means we're bringing together metrics, traces, and logs, but it should also mean that we're bringing together all the environments in which our workloads exist, whether they be the public clouds, whether they be multi-cloud environments, whether they're hybrid cloud environments, whether they are the data centers, or workloads that exist across those environments. If we want to automate IT ops for those workloads, we need observability across all those environments. If we were to not pursue that observability goal across the whole hybrid landscape, that would be equivalent, for example, in the automotive industry of saying, you know what, you're going to be fully automated the moment you get on the highway, but the moment you get back in town, well, you're going to have to drive your car. We'll never get to driverless if that's the way we think. We're going to need to automate, and to automate, we're going to need to bring observability across all the environments in which our workloads exist. And the good news is that our industries with vendors like Observe and others is heading in that direction and is putting a lot of effort to that. Now, the second element is AI, and we're now about a decade after the first AI ops companies were founded. And today, AI already does a pretty good job at certain use cases. We just talked about alert rationalization. But the good news here is that they will only get more powerful as we get closer to the observability goals. So we can look at AI becoming more and more capable as a result of achieving observability. You will see AI take on more and more use cases and deliver them more and more and more completely. And then the final element here is the operator. And here some of the same dynamics applies. You know, the AI must show its capability, essentially earn the trust of the operator before it can drive. So approaches, as Ciaran was saying, approaches to AI ops that favor transparency, auditability, are going to earn the operator's trust much faster than approaches that are essentially black box automation. There is also another key dimension to think about here when it regards to the role of the human in the automation of IT ops, which is that the human is a subject matter expert. The human here is routinely in contact with your environment, your workloads, and is seeing issues. And most of our operators here are able to say, you know what, I've seen this problem 15 times. I'm able to describe it. I know what metrics or logs or traces are going to be reflecting that this problem is happening. I have analyzed the root cause. I have analyzed and created resolutions. What I want to do now is to take my knowledge, encapsulate it into recipes, runbooks, anything that might allow us to automate what the operator already knows. There is such a diversity of use cases in IT ops that I don't think it would be wise for us to wait for AI to learn about all of them across every company, across every enterprise, across every configuration. I think one of the key steps along this journey towards driverless IT ops is really empower the operators to encapsulate their knowledge and create automation on their own. So expecting machine learning to do everything on their own, I don't think is going to be sufficient. We are going to need to empower human beings to put their learning and automate their own tasks. And with that in mind, if you don't mind clicking on the next slide, please, Jordan. One of the things here, very quickly, I'll bring this a little bit to OpsRamp. With automation as a goal, what I like a lot about the approach that OpsRamp is bringing is that it keeps all those three characters in mind. If you don't mind clicking once, yeah. So actually, you can click on all three. Thank you. So first of all, OpsRamp pursues the goal of hybrid observability. With a big data platform that supports hundreds of integrations, is extensible to new environments. It contextualizes this data with service maps that extends from the data center to the public cloud, and it makes interrogating the data really easy with universal query language like PromQL, for example. So it pursues that key goal of hybrid observability. That's one of the key components and requirements of automation. The next piece is that it has a AI machine learning platform that is already delivering on some of the most valuable cases of AI and IT ops today. Things like alert rationalization, probable root cause, anomaly detection, even the assignment of incidents to the most qualified team members. There's a whole number of use cases there that are already available, and there will be more as more and more capability is built through observability. And then finally, third, and perhaps highly differentiated in my view from some of the companies I've seen in the industry, OpsRamp doesn't forget about the operator and the user. It offers a robust process automation capability that allows them to streamline and automate their work. In essence, the tools for the humans to drive their own automation, with workflow engines, policy language, runbooks, a whole bunch of integrations into the downstream systems. The idea here is that you need to be able to capture human learning and put it to play. And where I'd like to end here is on this road to driverless IT ops, I believe the fast lane will include the combination of human learning and machine learning. And so I'm very enthusiastic about working with OpsRamp because it has that philosophy of combining the two. And I think this will be the fast lane for driverless IT ops.
Awesome. Thank you, Philippe. So, a quick question about these. So these slides and using a couple of the trends from Liam's previous slides, it sounds like that the role of the IT operator is obviously going to be changing and evolving. And Ciaran, you're building a product that is AI enabled, right? AI Ops is one of the core functions of the OpsRamp platform. So how do you, with the rise of the skills challenges in IT, right? We are seeing skills that we had never seen before in IT operations. We're trying to forecast the future, what those skills look like, the rise of the data analyst in particular, because data is going to play a bigger role in IT operations. Ciaran, how are you thinking about skill sets when you're architecting a product like this? Because obviously you're building for skills that are, in flight today, but also for new skills and new roles that may take hold in IT operations tomorrow. So can you bring us in a little bit to that thought process?
No, that's a really good question. I think that there's various dimensions to that. Let me start at the most complex, which are, and maybe Liam gets this question. If I deploy an AI ops solution, do I need data scientists on my team?
Yeah.
I'm not sure, Liam, if you get that question, but the answer that I've seen, if that is the case, then I think you may not actually have the right solution. You should not need data scientists on your team for an AI ops solution to be successful, in my view, in this IT operations space. But to answer your question, I think that since the emergence that Philippe talked about 10 years ago, I think many companies are looking at this as an opportunity to kind of upskill their resources, their people. And I think that there is an opportunity there because no organization wants very, very expensive resources working on repetitive tasks, either from the company's perspective or from that person's perspective. So I think it's an opportunity for them. I think that there is an opportunity for people that are, say that the operators in an organization, because the operators in an organization typically know how to go about fixing a thing and who they need to contact. I think an operator should really be in the crux of making sure that the AI ops solution is deployed. I think that they can really be evangelists for it. I think that there's I think it depends on the various roles in the organization. You've got like from the tier 1, tier 2 kind of pure operator folks, then to the subject matter experts that are managing various towers. Those kind of folks might have different needs. They may want to, automate fixes. They may want to say, this alert happens, I just want this to actually, fix it. They don't want to set thresholds, for example. That was on Liam's kind of point as well. I think then it kind of goes all the way up to kind of the executive. Their job may not change so much as they should know if they've deployed an AI ops solution, how that's helping them and what that may mean to their kind of organizational staffing needs. Ideally, it means they can take on more as environments are getting complex. The number of alerts are not decreasing. The number of outages are not going to decrease unless something kind of intervenes with that. So I think that they see that it's an imperative. So I think that to me that it impacts all of those from, do you need data scientists? No, is my view, to the jobs and tasks that those folks do. I actually think it's an opportunity for people in this space because I've talked to lots and lots of operators over the years, and the thing that they hate is doing the same thing over and over and again. So it's an opportunity for them. They want to embrace this type of technology.
So do you think, and maybe this is a question for the whole panel, that there is a similar, if I go back to our original conceit, right, that where there's a 6-point scale for driverless cars, for automation in automobiles, is there a similar 6-point scale for IT operations that maybe, Ciaran, that you're thinking about when you're building the product? And then maybe the whole panel would remark, like, what is the vision of the 6-point scale for driverless IT operations?
I think so. My answer would be yes, and I think we're in. There's probably some. It's an interesting question because I think that there's some companies and some of the original AI ops technology may have actually started off at some of these higher levels, rather than starting off at some of the lower levels. And to me, that's how it can be successful. Is to me, this is almost like an adoption journey, adoption curve. To me, full automation is the holy grail in operations world, which is there's no more outages. Imagine that. And I think to me that's what full automation says. There's no outages, there's no user impacting event. How and when we get there is really, really, it's to be determined, is my view. And I mean, that's where things like predictive, preventative, and things like that actually come into it. And I think it also goes back to Liam's earlier slide about deployments, number of deployments, the impact of it. I think it also goes back to the user experience. How does the user experience kind of impacted in this mix?
Yeah.
So
it's fascinating to me that you said that the level 5 full automation is no outages, but not no operators.
Right. I think, to me, if you gave an organization the option of, hey, do you want no outages and no user impacting events versus no operators, I know which one they pick. Having worked for many large enterprises that are losing so many millions, tens of millions, and in many cases, they may not even know how much they're losing. That's the imperative. And if they have to pay some level of, operators or what to make sure that that's a reality, they'd have no problem doing that.
I actually agree with Ciaran. I think the overriding goal is control, being in control of the system. And I think automation is maybe how you go at it when you really don't have a ton of people. But the overall goal is control. But I think it's interesting if we feel that the overall goal is control, and I mean, and we want the users involved. It suggests that the technologies that are going to be there needs to be driven to be consumable by users. And that's a different way of designing solutions than designing towards ultimate automation. So I think that could be one of the ways the industry goes. For me, in terms of that scale here, I think we should have a scale like that for IT ops. And I think companies should look at where they are across all their environments and pick your workloads, pick your environments and say, well, this workload, I feel I'm at this level. That workload, in storage, I'm at level 1. And compute, typically compute virtualization, we have higher level automation that we traditionally have seen in other areas. In the cloud, we traditionally have higher levels of automation as well. But I think companies could map out their progress and how much they have yet to accomplish if they look at it that way. I think we need a scale like that for us, for IT ops.
That's interesting.
I think talking about control is an interesting way to put it, because you do see within organizations, certain pockets of automation where some tasks are very automated and some are very manual, and it depends on the organization, the way they do things. And so, some have those certain tasks where they're like, we really need to automate this because it's toil, it's manual work for our people. But it's about getting control. And to that point, I want to go back to the driverless car comparison, because we've kind of alluded to the role of people even in the context of more AI involvement and automation. And to say it's a driverless car that's fully automated taking you from point A to point B is not saying that there's no human in the equation, but it turns the human from a driver into a passenger. And I think it's interesting because, whenever you talk about AI, there's the discussion of, are we just replacing people? Are we, taking jobs out of the equation? And I think, Ciaran spoke to this, where it's about taking the, functions of a job that people don't want to do, that are just drudgery, and taking those out of the equation so that they can focus on other things. And when we talk about, the speed of release cadences, it's about getting new things out to production, but that's always a balancing act. And when we talk about control, it's balancing availability, resiliency, the pace of innovation. And it's always, you're giving to one and taking from another. And so organizations are constantly going through this balancing act. And so, to an extent, I see AI in operations as a way to, help users with one part of the equation so that they can they can allocate their time to spending more on another part of the equation. Maybe that's, doing less management so that they can do more optimization, et cetera.
Yeah.
Can we stick a little bit with the skills discussion a moment? You just got back there for a moment, Liam, but and I don't not going to necessarily pick a fight with Ciaran, but I do agree that we don't necessarily want data scientists in IT ops, but I do think that jobs are going to change, because if you look at being equipped with those technologies, you now have the ability to interact with data, which requires a data literacy in the users. You have the ability to interact with AI. You're going to need to be able to assess it. And I think you need a literacy about that. And then the whole process of automating, process engineering, et cetera, that's also a skill set that will need to be practiced. I do think that we have an IT ops of the future where people spend a lot of their time analyzing and solving, redesigning their environments, their processes, leveraging these technologies, and a lot less of their time kind of doing actions that they're typically doing right now on the for example, on the break fix side. So I do think skills are going to be changing, and I actually think the jobs are going to be more interesting and more captivating for the for IT ops in general.
This is a great conversation. Unfortunately, I'm trying to keep us on time. We're running short on time, even though the topic is fantastic. I did want to get to a couple of questions that have been shared by the panel before we adjourn. So there were two questions that I think are relevant. One is, what are some of the success factors? We touched on this kind of gently with our discussion about fewer outages, but in the 5-point system, if we're still early days in getting to full automation, are there some key success factors that IT operators should be looking for in this journey? That's question number one. And then we'll want to touch on use cases here in a moment. So maybe I'll start with Ciaran. When you think about the success factors for when we share, is it just going to be a reduced number of alerts? Is it going to be something about consolidating data? What are some of the success factors that we should look for today?
That's a really good question. So you could look at how are organizations being measured? The things that they often think about are kind of mean time to detect, mean time to restore, or mean time to resolve, MTTD and MTTR. Mm-hmm. It's actually quite tricky in terms of like AI ops. How much do the AI ops, the before and after state, just say you'd measure that, can be tricky to estimate how much did the AI ops technology influence that and make that better. That's actually, it's not an easy one to answer. So those are some things. However, you can always look at things like, just think a simple example. If you're doing alert rationalization, then you should have less incidents that somebody needs to actually manually kind of take care of. Less incidents even being generated is kind of, so there's some simple things like that. I also like to look at things like, if you think of time spent, and I also really like to look at time saved. So if you look at so Philippe talked a lot about the human element. How much time were the humans spending, and how much of that time is being taken out of the system? In other words, if a human looked at an alert and then they suppress the alert because it's noise, but then you have a system that took them whatever amount of time and it had whatever amount of impact. But if you said, all right, but now that's automated through AI ops technologies, that you have that automated, and then you've taken that time out of the system and you've reduced whatever potentially user impact. So to me, the success is being able to measure things like that. How much, in that example, how much time did you take out of the system? So I think that's super critical to kind of understand. And I think that there's an onus on the vendors in this space to make sure that that's crystal clear, what value before and after state. The other thing that I bring up is, I kind of think back to the analogy around, and this is why I don't think you need data scientists. There's data science happening when you're shopping for your book on whatever, website that's happening, or when you're searching for your next movie. that's AI technology in the mix there saying, okay, I think you should do this. Similarly, I think there's an onus on the vendors in this space to say, I think you should do this because of, and we see this all the time. You watched whatever, so I think you might like this. The machine has actually learned and suggested the thing that you should do. So I think there's an onus to make sure that the thing that you do, that the people can trust it, but also where it's appropriate that they can say, and this is why I've made that recommendation. Mm-hmm. It's because of what's happened in the past. And I think sometimes that those pieces are missing and people are confused. Why did it do what it did? So I think that there's definitely an onus on, on vendors in this space to make sure that they're thinking about that. And my own personal belief is I'd prefer to have that, the adoption and the value realization lower in that curve in those levels. And if it's adaptable versus, hey, have technology that's higher in the curve, but maybe people don't know how to use it, or they're not using it, or they're afraid to use it.
So it sounds like, I know you're obsessed with mean time to insight. That's one of the things that your team is really focused on. And it sounds like that it's the changing definition of what that insight is, right? It starts with, some sort of maybe basic insight that you can get from the system. But as the system gets more mature, those insights getting to the why become more and more achievable. And you can actually learn more insightful information from the system as you move up that scale. It's interesting. Okay, so we'll do one more quick question before we adjourn. This is a great one from the panel, actually. Can driverless ops play a role in negating cyber attacks? Security was one of the big issues that I know that Liam had brought up in his slides. And I was thinking about that as we move further and further into control, over a complex system. What role does security play here? And so I guess I'll put this question to the panel in our 2 minutes remaining. How can driverless ops help in increasing and enhancing a security posture?
Well, I think it's an interesting question because I increasingly see the topic of observability going hand in hand with that of security because, a lot of organizations are already pulling in so much telemetry that can be used for really valuable insights for things like incident response, but that can also be used for, threat intelligence. And you do see security teams leveraging, pieces of telemetry in what they do. And I think we're increasingly seeing the realization that a lot of what's happening on the ops side in terms of observability can also be used to fuel security teams in terms of understanding what's going on in the environment, faster, and being able to potentially, notice threats sooner, just as we're looking at, trying to find performance impacting or downtime causing events faster. So I think there is a relationship there. And I think it is strengthening as we see more organizations kind of looking at how they can apply what's going on in observability, and then AI, factors into that data analysis that's going on with observability.
I agree with Liam. I think that to me, it's I think the key is observability, and a lot of people really think of single pane of glass, even in observability terms. And to me, it's about context, and it's about what the normal operating conditions are. And I think that there is, and being able to get all of that information about those systems, what's running on them, and then any kind of deviations from that norm. I think that that's where AI ops technologies can come into play as well.
Right. I agree with the observability point. I think another one is whether the AI itself is going to be able to operate across both domains. I mean, if you look at Ciaran, you've worked in these companies before, but the original AI ops companies were largely doing what some of the security event incident management companies were doing before, around correlating threats and correlating alerts and the like. So you see a commonality, not just in the reliance on observability, but also in some of the methods that have been used by the AI as well.
That's great. All right. Well, thank you very much to the panel. This has been a terrific discussion about the future of AI. For anybody who is interested in learning more, please continue the journey on our website. You can find the OpsRamp Guide to AI Ops, which is a broad overview of the whole landscape of AI Ops if you're looking to get started. OpsRamp does run regular surveys and does research on AI Ops. Most recently, we did the State of AI Ops report, which is also available on opsram.com. And then finally, I want to give a plug to Liam's excellent paper that kind of kicked off this conversation, which is also available on our website for a short term. AI Ops, an evolving sector sees promise and challenge in aligning with automation. It's a great paper and a very interesting discussion. So once again, we do appreciate everybody's participation in the webinar today. We'll be making this recording available on our website shortly at opsram.com. And we do look forward to many future insightful discussions on this topic and others. So stay tuned to this channel in the future. All right, thanks to the panel, Liam, Philippe, Ciaran. Thanks to our audience, and really appreciate your time. We'll see you next time. Thanks again.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.